I'm a Muslim, I'm a feminist, and I'm here to confuse you. The conversation about Muslim women is usually about headscarves and hymens, what's on our heads or not, and what's in between our legs and the price we pay for it. I love confusion because I know that as a Muslim woman, my story is much more than headscarves and hymens. The story I'll tell you today is just my story, but I assure you that there are millions of Muslim women out there who will confuse you just as well as I can. For kick-ass feminist icons, I have a long history to choose from. In the 7th century, there's Khadija, the first Muslim, and Prophet Muhammad's first wife. She was a rich divorcee, a businesswoman who owned her own business. She was 15 years older than him, and she proposed to him. My fondness for younger men has a precedent. First wave feminism, you say? I think of a Cairo train station in 1923 where the feminist Hoda Sha'arawi removed her face veil and said this is a thing of the past, decades before anyone was burning her bra. And so today she must be turning in her grave as so many try to force face veils on women and actually want to have this conversation. I come from a long line of strong women. My paternal grandmother was a teacher, a furious smoker, a fast walker, and a supporter of a soccer team that most of her children detested. My maternal grandmother, whose sexually racy jokes outraged her children, was pregnant 14 times. 11 survived. The eldest is my mother, who became the first woman in her family to get a PhD, and she has 3 children. I am the eldest of those children, and I have chosen to have no children. My mother's youngest child is my sister, who she had when she was 42, and my sister now is studying for her PhD, and she's dying to have a baby. Now, all that so far confuses enough people. I was born in Egypt, where I belong to my country's Sunni Muslim majority. At the age of 7, my parents moved us to London, where I learned to become a minority, but I also learned how little was expected from Muslim women. My teachers would say, "So, did your father bring you here?" as if we're all just following him around the world. And I would say, "No, actually, both my parents are studying for their PhD." And they would be shocked that my mother kept her maiden name. And I would say, "Muslim women keep their maiden name." I loved confusing them. At the age of 15, we moved to Saudi Arabia, and my world turned upside down. I learned there was more than one Islam. There was the Islam at home that my parents taught us as equals. My brother and I were brought up as equals. But there was an Islam outside that was very different, that treated women like children who needed men's permission to do everything. And I fell into a deep depression because I didn't know where I fit in between those differences. 2 main changes and 2 main lessons in Saudi Arabia. I began to wear a headscarf, and I became a feminist, and the 2 were not mutually exclusive. But on the bookshelves of my university, I discovered feminist Muslim women scholars who nurtured my feminism. I had vowed never to read anything by Muslim men again, so there were all these Muslim women helping me know that I'm not the walking embodiment of sin. I returned to Egypt, and there I learned that Muslim men were not the enemy, especially the young ones. No, I'm kidding. But I discovered, you know I have a weakness for them, but I discovered lots of women and male scholars who helped nurture my feminism, and more changes, this time about headscarves and hymens. Because I removed my headscarf, it no longer represented the Muslim woman that I was becoming. But I became a journalist who became obsessed with female genital mutilation because it smashed my heart to pieces to learn that so many women in my extended family had suffered from this practice. Now, this practice is nothing to do with religion. In Egypt, Muslims and Christians practice genital cutting. It's nothing to do with religion, it's all about hymens because it's about controlling women's sexuality. And to this day, I fight FGM every day. The next big lesson came when I moved to Israel as a Reuters correspondent. And I moved there because I wanted to see Israelis and Palestinians for myself. My big lesson there was that I became a liberal Muslim because I would see my ultra-Orthodox Jewish neighbors, and they reminded me of the ultra-Orthodox Saudi Muslims that I knew. And I realized that orthodoxy is much kinder to men than to women. And so I became a liberal Muslim. Next chapter in my life was when I moved to the US in 2000. I married an American, but it didn't last very long. Not because he's an American, we just didn't get along. And so when we got divorced, I decided to move to New York, but I didn't want to just get on a plane and start a new life 5 hours later. And so I did that most American of things. I got into my car and took a road trip. And I spent 18 days by myself getting to know America. Now, as a Muslim, I've been to Mecca on pilgrimage, but this was my American pilgrimage. And by the time I got to New York City, my reward was a Muslim community of people like me. And this was a year after 9/11. And together, me and that Muslim community experienced one of the most moving moments in my life when an American Muslim woman, a scholar of Islam called Amina Wadood, led the first mixed-gender public prayer. I prayed Friday prayer. I prayed next to a man, without my headscarf, and on my period. Sacrilege to many, but a delight to me. In Kuala Lumpur last year was another moving moment in my life when Muslim women and men from around the world launched a movement called Musawa, which is it's the Arabic word which means equality, and it is a global movement for equality and justice in the Muslim family. It was my feminist dream come true. One night, a young British Muslim woman said to me, if I have to choose between Islam and feminism, Islam will win. And the very next day, a young Egyptian Muslim woman said to me, if I have to choose between Islam and feminism, feminism will win. You see, I told you it was confusing, and that's what I love about it. Sometimes the confusion is just about showing up. My sister-in-law, for her, too, it's about headscarves and hymens. One of the rare cases. She wears a headscarf, and she's a gynecologist, so it's very much about headscarves and hymens. She, for the past 5 years, was the only woman OBGYN doctor in a tiny town in Ohio. And I would tell her, you are the true jihadi. Because every time your patients watch Fox News and hear about them Muslims and them Arabs, you are the antidote simply by being there. And this summer, many of us showed up to confuse people by going and standing outside the Islamic Community Center near Ground Zero that you know as Park 51. One afternoon, a very conservative right-wing cleric or pastor called Bill Keller, not the publisher of the New York Times, but Bill Keller, another one, was railing and ranting about Muslim women, and do you know what your husband can do to you under your religion? And I said, actually, I'm not married. And I loved confusing him because we had 6 women standing behind him, holding signs up saying peace, love, and tolerance, and he was pretending to care about me. So I loved confusing him, especially when I told him, you know what, Jesus loves me too. And so now, I fight the lazy stereotypes of Muslim women, and I fight misogyny in my religion through 2 ways. I'm no fool. I love confusion, but I know that there are violations committed in the name of Islam against women. But that's not my Islam, and Islam belongs to me too, and this is an incredibly exciting time to be a Muslim woman. All those kick-ass women I've told you about, they're my heroes. And so now, I imagine myself standing in a boxing ring, and on one side I've got the misogynists who pretend to be Muslims. On the other side, I have people like Bill Keller who pretend to care about me, and I fight them both. But I'm also a bumblebee because I'm a public speaker, and I take my pollen, my ideas, from one place to another and hope that they will blossom into wild and challenging orchards. The pollen might be sweet, but I sting like a bee. Because like Muhammad Ali, I will not hesitate to knock you out. And confusion is both my right and my left hook. Thank you.